What's up, everyone? Dynamic segments are a big part of creating a Next.js project. What are dynamic segments? That's what I'll be covering in this video. I'll discuss what dynamic segments are and when to use them. If you want the code I use in this video, there's a link to the repo in the description. Now, let's dive in. Dynamic routes are routes that take segment names that you may not know ahead of time and return information based on that segment name. These can take dynamic segment names that can be filled at request time or pre-rendered at build time using static site generation. There are 4 types of dynamic segments, and we'll cover each of them in turn. The first is a single dynamic segment. This is created by wrapping a folder's name in square brackets. For example, we can change our blog1 route and rename it to be slug, wrapped in square brackets. Refactor that. And now we can use this to populate blog data based on a database, CMS, or a plain JavaScript object. How? Through params. We'll discuss params in more detail in the next video, but for now, we can go to our page.tsx file here and change our export. We can pass in our params, and our params will have the type of promise, which will take our slug, which is type string. The slug here is going to be the last part of our URL path. To test this out, we can replace the button we're using, but first let's destructure a slug constant and set that equal to await our params. And now, since we're awaiting our params, that means that this needs to be an async function. Now we have our slug, and we can replace our button with an h1 that returns our slug. Now, before I run this, I need to remove any files that I'm not using, like error, loading, not found in template, because they will crash my project. So we will select those and delete them. And now we can run pnpm dev, and we can see that blog1 pops up for my h1 here on blog1. Now this can be whatever we want it to be. So I can just type in blog portfolio, and that will change there. You can also nest these segments to create more complex routes. For example, we could add a category segment by going to our blog and then adding a new directory, which we will call category. And then we can click and drag our slug into this directory. Now our blog is expecting a category route, which can be anything we want it to be. So I'll just type in cat there for category. But we can do things more interesting than that. So in our types, we not only get our slug, but we get our category now, which is also a string, and we can add our category to our destructured params here, and then wrap this in a React fragment and return an h2 that will return our category text. When I save this, we can see cat pop up there. And again, this can be whatever we want it to be, so I'll just type in A for category and then blog for the blog slug. The third type of dynamic segment is called a catch-all segment. These segments are defined by adding an ellipsis inside the square brackets for a dynamic segment. Let's create a new route called portfolio in our app directory. So I'll add portfolio. Now in our portfolio, we'll create a new dynamic segment called slug. And then in the slug, we will create a new page.tsx file. Similar to single dynamic segments, you can use params to get all the segments in your page's path. This will be returned as an array of slugs. So we're going to delete this import at the top here and then copy everything from our category slug page, paste it in here, remove our category type, and add an array to our slug string. And now when I save this and go to our portfolio page, and we can go to we'll type in slug, we can see that we get slug here. Now what we can do though is add more slugs to the end of it. So if I add slug 2, we can see this add to the end of our first slug. To make this easier to read though, we can just use our join method and add a comma and a space. Now when I save this, we'll see that our slugs are joined by a comma and a space. And again, this can go as long as we want it to. You can, of course, nest this in a single or multiple dynamic segment, but this must be the last segment in that directory. The last type of dynamic segment is called an optional catch-all segment. The purpose for this is to catch our portfolio root route here. So if I try to go to portfolio, we get a 404. But if we change our slug, so we'll rename this to be wrapped in another set of square brackets and refactor that, we then still don't see anything, but it's because our slug is undefined. So if we want to address that, we can return our slug if it exists, and if it does exist, we can check if the slug length is greater than 0. If that's true, we can return our h1 like it is, or we can do h1 portfolio homepage. Now when I refresh this, we can see that the portfolio homepage shows up, and now I can go to our slug and start seeing all of our slugs get added, but now our portfolio page is also rendering with that. Everything else here, like I've shown, operates exactly the same way in that when a parameter is defined, it will be returned as an array and should be handled accordingly. Using dynamic routes, we're able to build out robust sites that can then be statically generated. We'll go over how to do this in just a moment, but before we do, check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you never miss when I release more content about Next.js, Payload CMS, and other modern web dev technology. Tired of trying to keep up with all the news and updates across the technologies and companies you use? Sign up for my newsletter to get a bi-weekly overview of all the dev news from across the internet. The link to that is in the description. Thank you for your support. Now let's get back to it. To generate your routes statically, you'll need to use the function generateStaticParams, which can either be async if you're using a CMS to query data from a database, or it can be synchronous if you're not. Either way, I'll go over how to do this for each type of dynamic segment we've discussed. First, we'll go over the single and multiple dynamic segments. So either above or below our default export here, it doesn't matter which, we can export a new function called generateStaticParams and open up a function. Then we can set a constant called posts, set equal to an array of objects, which will have slug and will include a value of blog1. Then we'll copy this twice and include blog2 and blog3. Obviously, this isn't truly the most accurate way you would use this. Chances are you're going to be working with a CMS like Payload to return all of your documents, to then be mapped through and returned, as we'll see in the next step. But this gets us in the game. We can then return an array mapping through our posts with our post item, and then return our slug post.slug. Since we put our slug route in a category segment, let's go ahead and add the category keys in as well. So at the beginning of all of these, again, the order doesn't really matter. I can add category, and then I'm just going to add an empty string and then do category A, B, and C. And then we can add category here, which will read our post category as well. To see this in action, we'll need to run pnpm build. And when we see this build, we'll see that 8 static pages were generated, and we can see that our blog A, blog 1, blog B, blog 2, and blog C, blog 3 are all statically generated. That's what this filled in white dot means, as you can see here. Now, if we run pnpm start, I can go to localhost blog A, blog 1, and we can see blog 1 and A there. But if we go to blog 1 in category B, this will still show up, but it will not be statically generated. It should be noted that you can only generate params for the segments that are on or above your current route. Using our category and slug example in category slug, like we were, we can generate static params for both the category and slug dynamic segments. However, going up a level to the category segment, we would only be able to generate static params for that segment, not the slug segment below it. Now we can generate static params for catch-all and optional catch-all segments too. In our portfolio optional catch-all segment here, we can export that same function called generateStaticParams, and we can set another constant called portfolio, and we will pass in again our slug with an array of slugs this time, which can all be strings, and we'll do this twice more. We'll do B and C, 2 and 3, and then blog port. This would be enough for our regular catch-all segment, but since we have an optional catch-all segment here, we need to take care of our default case, which will be an empty array. And this is because the slug passes in undefined or an empty array into our generate static params here. We'll then return our portfolio map, and instead of post, just to be clear, it'll be a page. And then we can pass in our slug. That'll read our page.slug. And now if we restart and run npm build, we'll see now that 12 static pages have been generated, and of them is this portfolio optional catch-all segment. And we can even see that our default case, the portfolio route, is covered as well. So now we run npm start and then go to portfolio. We can see our portfolio homepage show up statically generated. If you want to statically render all paths the first time they're visited, you can return an empty array instead. So let's give that a shot by just returning an empty array here. No paths will be rendered at build time, but they will be cached upon first visit. So we will run npm build. We can see again that only 8 pages were generated statically, and our portfolio pages are not included in that. So now if we run npm start and go to our portfolio homepage, we'll see the same behavior, but as we saw up here, it's not statically generated. If you don't want unspecified paths to be statically rendered, you can do this by adding to anywhere in your file the export constant dynamic params option set to false. And doing this will, after we see from a npm build, only specified routes will be returned and all the rest will show a 404 message. So now if I run npm start and we go to our blog and we try to go to B blog 1, we see a 404 because this is not in our list of statically generated pages. Adding single, multiple, catch-all, and optional catch-all segments allow you to make an interesting and robust project. Pair these with a CMS like Payload CMS to generate static sites that load quickly and delight both users and search engines alike. If you found this video helpful, please like it and share it with others who might also find it useful. Check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel and receiving notifications so you never miss when I release more content about Next.js, Payload CMS, Tailwind CSS, and more. Also, consider subscribing to my newsletter to stay up to date with modern web dev news from across multiple platforms. There's a link for that in the description. If you have suggestions or questions, please leave those in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.